July 13th, 2010. We're here with Jack Gannon at MCC. Jack, when did you first come to the college?
I first came here July 1st, 1966. And at that time, the college had just been turned over to the state. Prior to that, of course, it had been under the town of Manchester. A couple of months before that, Fred Lowe had been named first president. He had been the dean, technically, before that. And the superintendent of schools was the de facto president. I started along with Lloyd Holt, and I believe Jack Scheidemann started July 1st, 66, too. We were really in a very small operation. Harry Godey was in a trailer out in the parking lot, along with the business office, which consisted of 2 people. I was hired as director of student personnel. My first office was the biology supply room. There was a desk in there, and they managed to put a phone in. And every day I went home smelling of formaldehyde. My wife was wondering what was going on. I had to explain to her where I was. But during that time, Fred Lowe had an office, and there was a small office space for perhaps we had 2 or 3 secretaries. Then we did eventually pick up the property down on Keeney Street, the old Keeney Street schoolhouse. And Fred Lowe moved down there and took the business office with him. I got his office. But we were still, as you know, operating only, classes were only from 3 until 10 at night. This created its own set of problems because the faculty that were in the high school weren't particularly thrilled about having somebody come into their room after school. And so quite often our instructors would go in and find all kinds of notes all over the blackboard with a big save next to it. So in effect they didn't have blackboard space. The custodians, of course, were thrilled to have extra people in the building that they had to take care of too. So it was a somewhat strained relationship, but we did get by.
Were you teaching before you got hired at the college?
No, I was assistant dean of students at Southern Connecticut State College, and I heard pretty much about Manchester Community College from Harry Godey, because I had known him when he was the director of admissions at Quinnipiac, and we were next to one another. And it was through Harry that I managed to come up to Manchester.
Now, was there a search process when you were hired, or was it?
No. It was pretty much. I was hired by Fred. I was interviewed by Fred in, I believe, January or February, and I was hired in March. But it was before the whole search committee process really was developed.
How would you characterize Dr. Lowe's contributions to the development of the college?
He was very, very different from my concept of a college president. I had worked for Hilton Bewley, who was one of the, typical college presidents. He called all the shots. He hired, he fired. What he said was absolute law. Fred was very, very different. He was much more democratic. He was a faculty guy at heart, and he came out of the classroom. And it took me a little while to get used to Fred's philosophy, but in the long run, I learned an awful lot from him. He showed me how to be a good administrator. He showed me how to deal with faculty, with your fellow workers. I think his contributions were tremendous. He was the one that had developed that sense of oneness with the faculty and the staff. It wasn't just us, the management. It wasn't them, the faculty. He was a very unifying person.
What was the college like as it was growing in the late 60s?
It was very unique. It was something happening all the time. The Vietnam War had a big impact on the tone of the college. We were starting to get vets coming back who were enrolling. We had a very active anti-war movement within the college. So these were 2 factors that were constantly working. Not violently, but it was obvious that they existed. everything was growing. When I first came, I think we had perhaps 600 students. The next year, we were up to 1,200. We were growing exponentially, and it was very obvious that we just needed space. Moving into the old Helco building, which was our spot from '67 up until 1984, I think. That gave us a daytime campus. It gave us some office space that we needed desperately. We had about 9 or 10 classes, I believe, throughout the building. And it meant that we were running classes then from 8 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock at night. But we were using the Helco building. We were still using the high school. We had classes running at Bennett Junior High School. We had offices on East Center Street. They were over the old house in Hale. I think at one time we had 8 different locations around town, which gave us a lot of presence and vision, but it was also somewhat difficult to try to coordinate things with people being spread all over the place. I recall the Kent State incident had a galvanizing effect on a lot of people. I think a lot of the final exams were canceled that year. It was a very tense time. It was for faculty, for administrators. But we grew. You move forward. We hired a lot of people during those, I'd say, between 66 and 70. A lot of the people, some of whom are still here, were hired at that time. And, we actually began to put together a cohesive faculty group, an identifiable student affairs division, a good firm business office. So those were important 4 years, I would think.
Who were some of your colleagues who made a particular impression on you during that period?
Be hard to pinpoint 2 or 3. I mean, there were a lot of people who contributed an awful lot to the college. As Bill mentioned before, Fred used to have his faculty meetings on a Friday, and it was unique. I recall we would meet in the downstairs, a room downstairs in the building, very low ceiling. And at one of the meetings, Jay Stager, who taught philosophy, got up and suggested that because it's a low-ceiling room and we're kind of crammed in here, and we not smoke during the meeting. I thought they were going to kill him. Yeah, I mean, how ridiculous. We all smoked, But I thought Jay was very brave to get up and make that stance, Now you practically have to go to East Hartford if you want to smoke anywhere near the campus. But I'm trying to think of some of the Jim Tatro, of course, was very active in developing the social science division. Bob Fenn, who had been teaching biology, evolved and became the dean of faculty. And for a period of time when Fred had a mild heart attack, Bob was the acting president. And I recall saying to Bob, I said, that must be an awfully tough job, Bob. And he said, it doesn't have to be. He said, a good president or any good administrator is a person who gets the best people he can around him and gives them and empowers them and lets them do their job. And that's something I always carried with me. I try to make it part of my philosophy. When I was in student affairs and later when I was in continuing education, get the best people you can and let them do your job, and you just try to help them do their job.
What were the facilities like back in those early days, mid-'60s, early '70s?
They were tight. I know we did a lot of office switching. I remember one time when we still had the East Campus, and we had the low building too. Lloyd Holt and I counted up the number of offices we'd had between the two of us, and it came to something like 20 or 21. And I think Lloyd had more. I know I had a bunch of offices moving around for different reasons. And between here in the East Campus, we were told not to call it the old campus. But The facilities were tight. Getting the East Campus in 1971, I believe we opened that. That was such a leap forward because we could say that we had a campus. We had a campus. We had separate buildings. We had grass. We still had the Hartford Road. So it was really exciting trying to make two classes 10 minutes apart from this campus down Hartford Road. There were a lot of speed records that were set, I'm sure. We used to encourage students, don't try to schedule classes between the two sites. It really can't be done effectively. But moving into the East Campus was really, really felt like we'd arrived. We were the first community college in the system to have anything that even resembled our own campus.
And then you were here in '84 when the Love Building opened.
That's right. Yeah. At that time, I'd gone over to continuing education, and we did move up to the Low Building, and settled in the back end of the Low Building, and had about 4 or 5 offices there. And then the decision was made that the Learning Center, which was Mona Martin's operation, really could use that space. So we had a trade-off. We took ourselves back down to the old administration building, and they reconverted that on the promise that those would be our classrooms. Because in continuing education, as I'm sure Melanie can tell you now, the toughest thing is getting space. And this way we had some dedicated classrooms that we knew we had all day and all evening. So we moved our whole operation down there, and we were there until I retired in '97.
Can you you've told some amusing stories, and I know that's one of your talents. Can you give us some other anecdotes about your career here?
Well, there's a lot of things I suppose that evoked some humor. I was talking to Jim Tatro a week or so ago and reminded him that when we were in the Helco building, we had something called the Stairwell Gallery, and this was about the only place you could put art. And Bob Manning was the curator, I would guess you would call it. And he, anytime anything was questionable about the type of art that he put up, he would whip out an old tattered letter that he had from Fred Lowe that gave him the authority to make the decisions on what would be hung there. Well, one year they had a student show, and we had a student, David Faulkner was his name. David Faulkner crafted a head made of hamburger. And this sat in the display case. And some people said, what is going on with this? And, of course, Bob whipped out his letter. And so this head sat there. And over a period of time, it started to rot and deteriorate. And it got to the point where Bob would keep whipping out his letter. Harry Godey was the dean of students at the time. And I guess it finally got to the point where when the thing started to crumble and really start to smell, that was it. Harry whipped open the case, grabbed the thing, threw it into the trash. Bob Manning just about had a heart attack, because he was destroying art. Well, we all thought we were applauding Harry on the side, but I've never forgotten that head. I can still picture it now. We had some humorous times. We had such a unique mixture of students. I know I used to run the graduations, and in maybe the 20-some graduations that I was involved with, I can only remember one year where the valedictorian was not a woman who had come back to school. Usually a married woman with children. They would come back, they had seen the light, they would come in here and they would just kick the courses to pieces. And I think the one fellow who was the exception was an older student. He was a state trooper, and he happened to be the valedictorian. But he was the only man. It was usually a woman, and it was usually someone who came in with knocked a 4.0 average. But it was such a great opportunity for such a second chance type of people coming back. I can think of one person in particular, Tom Sheridan, who's on our regional council, a very successful lawyer. Tom had flopped the first time he'd gone to college. He went into the service, did his time in Vietnam, came back, came to Manchester, ended up being the president of the Student Senate. He was very typical of the type of student that we were attracting. You know.
Some of the people we've talked to have commented on the camaraderie that existed among the faculty and staff in the 60s and 70s. Was that your impression, that there was a real bond between people?
Yes, very much so. I'd say because we'd all started off, we started the college. You know, we felt we had that pioneer spirit, and there was a good deal of camaraderie. During the Denison years, I would say that was stressed because there was a lot of management versus faculty. It was the beginning of the collective bargaining period, and with any new contract, it's tested. It's a new experience. As I'd mentioned before, there were a lot of frivolous type grievances that were submitted, and so that was kind of a tight period. But at the same time, you know, we did have the feeling that, you know, we started this place. You know, this was nothing. Now look what we've built. You know, when we had the low building, we thought, man, we'd really attained Valhalla. None of the other colleges had anything even close to that. And then we found out pretty soon we filled that up pretty quickly too. So you know, space has always been a factor. It is right now. You know, with the economy not being what it should, I understand they're turning students away. And we have obviously the nicest campus in the entire system. You know.
If you look back at the time you worked here at the college, is there anything that really stands out as the highlight of your career?
No one highlight, I would say. I was fortunate enough to, as I say, you know, working with Fred Lowe, I learned a lot. I worked with working with Harry Godey for several years. He was my boss, and I learned a lot from Harry. I thoroughly enjoyed you know, the student affairs and the services that we were able to provide students. At the same time, when I had the opportunity to move over to continuing education, that was a new challenge, and I had a great staff there, and I had some very creative people, and I used to keep telling them, "You guys make me look good," you know, and they did, you know.
No, I think was it during your tenure in continuing ed that the college had a lot of off-campus programs at some of the corporations?
We had a lot of off-campus programs. When Jim Tatro left, he had been the continuing ed dean prior to my coming over. He had, of necessity, a lot of off-campus sites. He was out in Mansfield. He was at Bennett Junior High School. He was wherever he could find space, because we simply didn't have the space here on campus to offer the programs. With the opening of the Low building, we didn't need as many off-campus sites for credit courses. But we soon realized that we had to expand our credit-free programming. And, of course, if you're expanding your programming, you need space. So we were pushed. We were operating sites in South Windsor. We had courses for a while over at East Hartford to Penny High School. We did have several classrooms at the East Hartford Community Center when they opened that. They have since taken that space back, but we had about 5 classrooms there, and offered a lot of mostly credit-free courses there. But the people liked having you up in Bolton. They had requested to have us come in. That made it easier. They could say yes for their citizens. We have college offerings right here on site for you.
Imagine that you were talking to someone who just got hired to start their teaching career at MCC. What advice would you give to that person?
Don't come in with preconceived notions. Expect any kind of a total range of abilities. Expect a total range of personalities. In a way, you're going to have the opportunity to deal with such a spectrum of personalities that you should take that as a plus. You're not at MIT where you're not going to be dealing with a specific highly intelligent group of people who have very specific goals. You're going to be dealing with a lot of people who have the foggiest idea of what they want to be when they grow up, who may change their mind 4 or 5 times just in the 2 years that they're, or 3 or 4 or 5 years that they happen to be here. But to be open, be prepared to be supportive, and enjoy it.
Are there any other areas that you want to cover that we haven't discussed yet?
No, I just say my whole experience here at the college I feel has been positive. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I mean, that doesn't mean there weren't days you dreaded coming in because there was something horrible that was going to happen that particular day, or there were meetings that you had coming up that you didn't really want to go to. But all in all, when I decided to retire, it was one of the toughest decisions I ever made. Fortunately, I had the opportunity to come back, in a couple of other positions, and connect with the college. And I feel I'll always have some sort of connect with the college, whether it's serving on a committee, whether it's serving in some sort of advisory position. I can't honestly say, well, yes, I used to be associated with the college, but I'm not anymore.